Oh, hi Al, how are you? What am I doing? I'm just sitting here admiring the beauty of this colorful stained glass. I agree, color is rather complex. It deals in psychology, science, and aestheticism. But modern theories on color help us to better understand its nuances. For example, the fourth dimension of color helps us to recreate unique lighting situations like these, or even to analyze the colors of works of stained glass. What's the fourth dimension? Well, simply put, it's an expansion of the old color wheel system. It uses a dual wheel that utilizes 6 primary colors rather than the traditional 3, with its primary purpose to focus on the added dimension of transparency and opacity inherent within pigments. While that may sound complex, it's not that difficult to understand or implement. Sure, Al, I can teach you about it. You see, historically, color is taught to us as having 3 dimensions. These are hue, which is the name of the color, saturation, how bright or dull a color is, and value, how light or dark a color is. Now this system works, however, it is rather rudimentary, and in many cases it falls short or has too many imperfections for practical use. For this reason, the ideas of rudimentary color have been expanded upon. A great example of this contemporary expansion of color theory is an RGB color model versus a CMYK color model. Print deals with CMYK, and any types of digital screens or light-based mediums deal in RGB. This difference between light-based color mixing and pigment-based color mixing tends to be one of the biggest factors for inconsistency within color theory taught today. As such, artists like Johannes Itten began to expand the definitions and theories behind color relationships and mixing. Itten believed that the power of color was not in individual colors, but rather in their contrasts. He explained that these contrasts create different effects, wherein high contrasts evoke weight and advancement, and low contrast relationships evoke a sense of weightlessness and recession within artworks. Here is a look at Itten's list of color contrast relationships. While Itten's list is quite comprehensive, it does neglect that fourth dimension of color, the concept of the contrast between opaque and translucent colors within a work. Light is rudimentary in the creation of artwork. It is part of value, hue, and saturation, and yet it is often overlooked when thinking about color theory. However, if we include this fourth dimension of color, paintings become much easier to both create and to analyze. So let's take a painting like this one by John William Waterhouse, titled Circe Invidiosa. More specifically, I want to take a look at this water that is pouring from the glass vessel that she is holding. The reason being is that this is where the fourth dimension of color really takes the lead in terms of color theory. Traditionally, if you were painting this, you may approach this with the logic of lightening the green hue of the water to create the illusion that light is refracting through the liquid. This, of course, is correct. However, the issue comes when we try to execute such a process. This color would likely glow due to the translucency of the light passing through the liquid. So, you would choose a color which approximates this, perhaps a green with a similar hue, and you would attempt to add this lighting effect to this color by applying white to the mixture. However, in doing so, you will have rendered your translucent color opaque, and you would have also dulled the saturation of your color. This leads to a complete undermining of the glowing clarity that you had first attempted to achieve. The reason for this deals with the pigment of the paint itself. There is a difference between inorganic and organic pigments, and this difference is their translucency. The issue is likely not stemming from your green. You probably unconsciously chose a green with a similar translucency without even knowing it. White, however, especially titanium white, is highly opaque. Thus, by adding this pigment, you eliminate the natural translucency of that green paint. The solution to this is to apply your translucent green over top of a dry layer of titanium white. The result will be a lighter hue of the green that retains its translucent qualities. Thus, from this exercise, we know that we must first look at the difference between organic and inorganic pigments. This too is the reason for having 6 primary colors as opposed to 3. 1 set for opaque hues and 1 set for translucent hues. But we'll discuss that more in a moment. When the 4th dimension of color is structured into the color wheel, both organic pigments and inorganic pigments are used. Organic pigment molecules have carbon chains and/or rings at their core molecular structure. Inorganic pigments do not have carbon chains and/or rings at their molecular core. This is logical if we think about it. Organic pigments would contain carbon like all living things here on Earth. Thus, inorganic pigments would not contain such carbon data, as they are not naturally occurring. Aside from this, the major difference between these pigments is their level of opacity. Let's compare the characteristics of these types of pigments and get an idea of which pigments are inorganic and which are organic. One of the major differences between the two types of pigments deals with their refractive indexes. Inorganic pigments, which tend to be opaque, have high refractive indexes, sometimes coming in at 2 or more. Organics are usually 2 or less, meaning that they are naturally more translucent. Good question, Al. Refractive indexes deal with how easily light can pass through an object. Thus, the higher the refractive index, the more the light slows down and is reflected back into the eye. Right. Or optical sensor in your case. The same is true of pigments with low refractive indexes. These let light pass through more easily, and thus they allow us to see through them to a certain extent. You may have already encountered this in painting naturally. Usually colors like reds and yellows have very low refractive indexes. Thus they don't cover over very well. Knowing these nuances of paint allows us to create works with more efficiency, but also helps us to digest how other artists tackled color in their work. In addition to the refractive indexes of organic and inorganic pigments, there is a difference in their ability to tint other colors. Inorganic pigments tend to be less effective at tinting colors, requiring much more of the tinting color to impact the color that you're attempting to change. This is the opposite case in organic pigments, as they are not easily diffused in mixtures due to their greater pigment particle surface area. Like with all things, however, there are exceptions to these rules. Not all inorganic pigments lean towards increased opacity, and vice versa. So that means that while we have guidelines to these principles, we cannot guarantee that all inorganics are opaque and all organics are translucent. The way that we can navigate this issue, however, is to simply refer to the manufacturer's documentation. Most major paint manufacturers will provide information on translucency and opacity. For more detailed references, you can also look online at sites like Pigment Through the Ages. There are a few other things to consider regarding inorganic and organic pigments as well. You'll often find paints that list the term hue on their label, such as cadmium yellow hue or cadmium red hue. This is a clear sign that the pigment is not a true pigment. Rather, it is a hybrid of some kind. Make sure that you are buying the real pigment when choosing paints. These are often more expensive, but ensuring that the pigment is authentic is important, especially if you want to leverage something like the dual wheel color system to your advantage. Also, the binder of a paint has a great impact on its refractive index. The greater the disparity of refractive indexes, pigment molecule to its binder, the greater the push toward opacity. This is especially relevant if you or the artist you are analyzing uses powdered pigment in their process. Keep in mind that in powder form, there is no binder to the pigment. This means that even paints with very low refractive indexes, such as Indian yellow, will appear opaque. It is because air has a very low refractive index, coming in around 1. When the powdered pigment is surrounded by something like linseed oil, the disparity between the pigment and the binder reduces, and the resulting paint becomes translucent. Take that same pigment and mix it into an organic tempera paint, where the binder is egg yolk, and the disparity between the refractive index is increased, creating a far opaquer paint. Thus, one pigment appears to have 3 different opacities simply due to the binder or lack thereof. So what does all this mean in regard to a color wheel system? Well, the dual color wheel has 3 translucent primaries on the outside wheel. These are the organic pigment primaries from which secondary and tertiary translucent colors on this wheel are made. The inside wheel, on the other hand, is made of inorganic primaries. These are the opaque pigment primaries from which opaque secondary and tertiary colors are made. You can also think about this as the standard color wheel on the inside surrounded by the fourth dimensional color wheel on the outside. Note the small circled X's placed on both the inorganic and organic rings. These serve to help identify which are translucent and opaque wheels. To make these wheels, you will need 3 primary colors for each wheel. To begin, we have our 3 organic primaries. These are phthalo blue-green shade, quinacridone rose, and azo or Hansa yellow. These 3 primary organic pigments approximate the first 3 pigments used in the CMYK printing process, which is important because, as we stated before, the traditional RGB model is in reality aligned with light-based media, not pigment-based media. These organic pigments are translucent leaning, and they have low refractive indexes. The 3 primary inorganic pigments are opaque leaning and consist of real cerulean blue, real cadmium red, and real cadmium yellow. Remember that you always want real pigments whenever possible. Having these 6 primaries allows for the creation of the full spectrum of both opaque and translucent colors. This in turn allows for a much wider variety of approaches to color application. It also expands our ability to analyze paintings with the knowledge that light and translucency play a pivotal role in the development of paintings. There are many applications of the dual color wheel theory in cause and effect formal analysis. As a critic, you must be aware of how opaque and translucent primaries work together to yield the desired painting results and effects. This then allows you to discuss the 4th dimension of color in any formal analysis you may undertake. For example, you need to know how a painter would begin using this type of system. Would they begin with a translucent or an opaque foundation? Knowing these key formal decisions about which pigments to use and how to use them allows you, as a critic, to determine what got the painter to their final look and feel, especially in terms of translucent light use. You see, while translucency and light-based issues may seem minuscule in terms of painting analysis, it can have a huge impact. There is a mysticism and sanctity surrounding color and light. It's the reason that stained glass pulled pilgrims thousands of miles to religious sites. It is also the reason that contemporary light-based works have such a great impact. In short, the use of this system only serves to make you a better artist and art analyzer. Light and color are nuanced. They can tell the viewer much about the work, even if they are not fully aware of these influences. As an artist and art critic, you must leverage new breakthroughs like 4th dimensional color to build your vernacular about art and to enhance the work you create. Yeah, it is beautiful, Al. It really is.